El otro elemento fundamental está alrededor de la defensa, de la inversión en defensa. Como le venimos diciendo, una parte de la inversión del inversor está empezando a mirar alrededor de cómo el capítulo de la defensa en su cartera es uno de los elementos clave. Por ello, vamos a tener ahora con nosotros al responsable de análisis de defensa en Europa, de Bank of America, Ben Heelan. Good morning. Welcome to Negocios.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having this time with us. We are very interested to understand the outlook for the European defense sector on the stock market. What are the prospects for the coming months?
Yeah, look, I think that what you have seen year to date is obviously a material shift in terms of the outlook for defense in Europe, where before a lot of countries had talked about getting towards the 2% of GDP. We're never actually meeting that. Now there has been like this renewed emphasis around Europe rebuilding its defense industrial base and rebuilding those industrial capabilities that it has lost over the last 3 decades. So I think what we have seen has been like a real structural shift in terms of Europe's attitude towards the defense industry. Obviously, we had the NATO summit a couple of weeks ago now, where we've announced this 5% of GDP target, 3.5% on defense and 1.5% on defense-related equipment. And I think what we're going to see over the next couple of months is we're going to see basically two things. We're going to see countries articulate how they're going to achieve that in terms of financing, in terms of budgeting for those higher levels of defense spending. But also we're going to see what they want to spend the money on and what those capabilities are going to be. And I think that those capabilities are going to center around communications and surveillance infrastructure, air defense, logistics, inventory, and advanced weapons systems such as missiles and air dominance. So I think that companies that have exposures to those themes are going to be the companies that see a lot of the order momentum in the next 2, 3, 4 years. And alongside that, like I said, there's going to be a big debate about financing, right? Which countries are really going to go to the 3.5%, which aren't, and the countries that are, how are they going to support that from a budget perspective?
The German government has given the clearest indication of a significant defense spending effort. Is Germany the country with the greatest potential in the defense sector?
At the moment, absolutely, right? Germany is coming from a position of not spending the 2% on GDP back in 2021 pre-Ukraine. They were spending about 1.4% of GDP. It was roughly 17% of that was spent on actual equipment, right? So they were spending about 7-8 billion euros a year on actual equipment. 2022, they announced the 100 billion special budget. And recently, obviously, Chancellor Merz has announced that they will get to the 5% of GDP and the 3.5% on defense by 2029. And if you put 30-ish, 35% of that into procurement, which is what we think we will see, you're looking at 60 billion euros worth of equipment a year. So going from 7 to 8 in 2021 to 60 in 2029 is obviously a significant increase that we think is going to happen. We think it's sustainable. And in terms of the countries in Europe right now, that is the steepest curve of growth that we see. We see good growth in Spain, even though Spain has obviously said they don't want to spend the 3.5%. They'll go to roughly 2.1% in 2025. That is still a lot more than what was being spent a year ago and 2 years ago. So there's still significant growth in Spain. We're going to see good growth in Italy. We're seeing high single-digit growth in France. So even though some countries will not necessarily get to the 3.5% on GDP, you are still seeing significant growth in terms of what they are spending on defense.
But if we see all of this in perspective, what is Spain potential, especially considering what are you telling us that the Spanish government does not want to reach this 5%?
Yeah, so Spain has talked about getting to 2.1%. It's roughly an incremental 10 billion euros to be spent on defense, and a lot of that will be on equipment, right? And so that will benefit the defense companies that are exposed to the Spanish budget, right? So Indra, just as one example of a company that we cover that is exposed to those increases in the Spanish defense budget. So yes, obviously, the Spanish government has said that they don't feel the 3.5% is right for them. They can achieve the capabilities that they require with a lower number. And I think, look, the reality is that we had a 2% target for a very, very long time as NATO, and there are only 4 countries that were meeting that objective pre the Ukraine invasion. The world is obviously a very different place now. Obviously, there was more attacks in Ukraine over the past couple of weeks. Every single night, there seems to be attacks. You've seen everything that's happened in the Middle East recently. The world is a very, very different place. So I think the urgency that governments are dealing with defense has fundamentally changed. But I think there are going to be governments in Europe that will be slower to achieve the higher spending on defence. In the UK, we have obviously talked about getting to the higher levels of defence spending, but that's going to be an issue for the next parliament. We've cut our aid budget in order to provide incremental financing for defence in the short term. In France, there hasn't really been any communication about getting to 3.5% just on defence, and they are progressing with the existing legislation, the military programming law that was enacted a number of years ago. In Italy and in Spain, we don't think they will get to the 3.5%. If you take Europe as a whole and you include the countries in Scandinavia and all the countries in Eastern Europe and what's going on in Germany and a number of the other countries, we think you're still going to get very, very close to the 3.5% on defence, 1.5% on defence related. It's just the mix is going to be different.
What is the greatest risk to the sector?
Yeah, the risk at the moment is governments' abilities to afford these this increase in defence, right? And I think the challenge is that obviously governments in Europe have a significant bill in terms of welfare and social policies that also is important. At the same time, you have seen a significant increase in the pace of innovation of warfare in the last 3 years, right? If you look at what has happened with drone technology in Ukraine over the last 3 years, the pace of innovation there has been so significant, right, that things are changing every month in terms of how those solutions are being applied. And so I think that what we have seen is that warfare has just become far more multifaceted over the last 5 to 10 years, and the war in Ukraine has shown very acutely that the solutions that Spain and the UK and France or whoever have relied on for a long period of time, they don't really apply in a lot of these new areas of combat, right? So there is no real leader in autonomy in Europe, right? And that is obviously an area that is going to be significantly invested in. How do you protect your critical national infrastructure against drone attacks from, at the moment, that is a new concept that people are having to get to grips with. So most countries have a challenge around budget affordability. But I think what you're also seeing is governments are waking up to warfare, and the threat level has just become much more multifaceted than it ever has been before, and that requires actually a significant amount of investment in order to properly protect, you, me, and everyone in Europe.
Who will benefit most from European governments' defense spending? European companies or American companies?
Yeah, Look, I mean, Macron from France has in particular been extremely vocal about this. It is pointless having Europe spending this much money with that money going to the United States or, countries and defense suppliers outside of Europe. So, rearm EU, they want the money to be spent in Europe. So European companies will be the primary beneficiaries of this. Now, that said, because of the situation in Europe, we just have not invested in defense in the way that we probably should have been with hindsight for 15 years. And as a result, there are certain capabilities we just do not have, right? We do not have a Patriot equivalent system from an air defense perspective, right? We don't have HIMARS rocket artillery, right, which is used, by a lot of the Eastern European countries to protect the border there, right? We don't have stealth capabilities. We obviously buy the F-35, so I think we're still going to be reliant on the US from a defense procurement perspective in certain key capabilities as we scale up our own defense industry. But as we look over the next 5 to 10 years, the majority of that money will find its way into the European economy, European innovation, European R&D budgets, and European defense procurement. And I think you're seeing a lot of evidence of this because companies like Rheinmetall have signed ventures and are working on joint ventures with Lockheed Martin and Anduril as a way of providing US companies access to the European market, recognizing that there is going to be a very, very big and real buy Europe focus for this defense money.
Ben Heelan, responsable de análisis de defensa en Europa de Bank of America. Thank you very much for having this time with us. Good day and good business.
Thank you.